Hello and good evening. Thank you for tuning in to the Lessons of Vietnam show. Here on the Lessons of Vietnam show, we try to tell the true story of the Vietnam War and those who were involved. A lot of mistruths and half truths out there, and we try to tell the truth the best we can find it. We have to work hard sometimes to get it. I'm your host, Bill Dixon, Vietnam veteran 67, 68, little thing called TET. We're broadcasting courtesy of Nissan Communications from their world headquarters here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And to touch base with us and be part of the show, you participate by calling 919 518 9773. Now, if you're sitting out there, I want you to take a pencil and a piece of paper and write that number down, 919 518 9773. Or even better, computers 2K voice on Skype. Now, Skype is a free service. You can go on to Skype and get your telephone set up. We do a lot of our long distance interviews by Skype. So go on to Skype, and I will try to remember these to give you these numbers more during the show. But you should forget. I get wrapped up in what I'm doing. It's kind of. I don't have Alzheimer's. I think I have half-Alzheimer's because I can't remember stuff. Actually, I remember stuff pretty good. It's retrieval I have problems with. And so hope you enjoyed tonight's show. Again, we're going to be talking about the last part of our series, Secrets and Mysteries of the Vietnam War. But before that, we want to make sure that we do something that's very important to us. We're going to be doing the Veterans Crisis Line. That's 1-800-273-8255. Press 1. And there's somebody out there waiting to talk. So as I always say, if you are a veteran, you know a veteran who is struggling, there's a lot of Vietnam veterans who are now having problems with post-traumatic stress, as it didn't bother them so much before, but now they've kind of slowed down from work and got retiring, and those nightmares and thoughts are coming back. So keep an eye on those old folks that are Vietnam vets and so forth. Except for me, I'm not old. So just keep an eye out on those. But there's the number, and there's somebody there willing and talk to you and so forth. But okay, moving right along with the show. As I said, our show is going to be Secrets and Mysteries of the Vietnam War. So we're going to cozy up to some good mysteries. All right. We're going to get started on the first one. And the first one is Operation Dork. Now, that's a good name for a secret operation, Operation Dork. In January 1961, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, the man who ran the whole Vietnam War through computers, he sent a directive about chemical and biological weapons to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, urging them to consider all possible applications, including use of as an alternative to nuclear weapons. Prepare a plan for the development of an adequate biological and chemical deterrent capability to include cost estimates and appraisal of domestic and international political consequences. Now, if you go back and think about what I just read, it didn't say anything about consequences to the environment, consequences to the people involved. It was what people are going to say about it across the country. In other words, they're going to point the finger and say we were bad boys, and then how much it cost. Well, you kind of get the idea of the whole thing there. The Joint Chiefs established a joint task force that recommended a 5-year plan to be conducted in 3 phases. On April 17, 1963, President Kennedy signed the National Security Action Memorandum 235, which approved policy guides governing the conduct of large-scale scientific or technological experiments that might have significant or protracted effects on the physical or biological environment. Well, at least he thought about that part anyway. Experiments which by their nature could result in domestic or foreign allegations that they might have such effects will be included in this category, even though the sponsoring agent feels confident that such allegations would in fact prove to be unfounded. Wait a minute, we're going to do it, and they come out and say, well, y'all did it, but that we're going to say that the facts are unproven, unfounded. Okay, that's typical government. Project 112 was highly classified military testing program, which was aimed at both offensive and defensive human, animal, and plant reactions to biological and chemical warfare in various combinations of climates and terrain. The United States Army Chemical Corps sponsored the United States portion of an agreement between the United States, Britain, Canada, and Australia to negotiate, host, conduct, or participate in mutual interest research and development activities and field testing. Okay. The command structure for the Deseret, okay, that's it, that's the word, Deseret Test Centers, which was organized to oversee Project 112. Somewhat bypassed standard Defense Department channels and reported directly to Joint Chiefs of Staff and U.S. cabinets consisting of Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, and to a much smaller extent, the Secretary of Agriculture. In other words, don't let Congress know about it. Experiments were planned and conducted by the Deseret Test Center and Deseret Chemical Depot at Fort Douglas, Utah. The tests were designed to test the effects of biological weapons and chemicals weapons on personnel, plants, animals, insects, toxins, vehicles, ships, and equipment. Project 112 and Project SHAD. Experiments involved unknowingly test subjects who did not give informed consent and took place on land and at sea in various climates and terrains. Experiments involving humans, plants, animals, insects, aircraft, ships, submarines, and amphibious vehicles. In other words, if you happen to be in these areas that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, they wouldn't tell you, but you were a test subject. Okay. There was a large variety of goals for the proposed test. For example, selective protective devices in preventing penetration of a naval ship by a biological aerosol, the impact of meteorological conditions on weapon systems performance over the open sea, the penetratability of jungle vegetation by biological agents, the penetration of an Arctic inversion by a biological aerosol cloud, the feasibility of an offshore release of mosquitoes. We're gonna forget the scientific name there. We're just gonna go to mosquitoes as a vector for infectious diseases. The feasibility of a biological attack against an island complex and the study of the decay rates of biowarfare agents under various conditions. Now, on the way here, I was listening to the news and they were talking about this new tick that almost you can it will bite you, and they just had one in Wisconsin. A little girl got bit, and a couple of days later she was dead by this tick. But I don't think the government had anything to do with that one. Known as the yellow fever mosquito, that word is the main vector or carrier of dengue fever and yellow fever in certain regions of North, Central, and South America. The mosquito is an early morning or late afternoon biter, but will also bite at night under sufficient artificial lighting. Okay. In May 1965, vulnerability tests in the U.S. using the anthrax simulant Bacillus globuli were performed in the Washington, D.C. area by SOD covert agents. One test was conducted at the Greyhound bus terminal and the other at the northern terminal of the National Airport. So in 1965, if you happened to be that day, you got tested and so forth. In these tests, the bacteria was released from spray generators hidden in specially built briefcases. Boy, they were sneaky. SOD also conducted a series of tests in the New York City subway system between 7th and 10th of June 1966 by dropping light bulbs filled with Bacillus subtilis. In the latter test, results indicated that a city-level epidemic would have occurred. Local police and transit authorities were not informed of these tests. Okay. Project SHAD, an acronym for Shipboard Hazard and Defense, or sometimes decontamination, was part of the larger program called Project 112. Now, you could understand where they would want to make sure that they could decontaminate a ship or contaminate a ship and so forth. But I think they could have done it without people, but then they didn't ask me. Project 112, which was conducted during the 1960s, Project SHAD encompassed tests designed to identify U.S. warships' vulnerabilities to attacks with chemical or biological warfare agents and develop procedures to respond to such attacks while maintaining a warfighting capability. The Department of Defense, DoD, state that the Project 112 was initiated out of concern for the ability of the United States to protect and defend against potential CB threats. Project 112 consisted of both land-based and sea-based tests. The sea-based tests, called Project SHAD, were primarily launched from other ships such as the USS Granville, S. Hall, and U.S. George Eastman. Army tugboats, submarines, or fighter aircraft were designed to identify U.S. warships' vulnerabilities to attacks with chemical or biological warfare agents and to develop decontamination and other methods to counter such attacks while maintaining a war-fighting capability. The classified information related to SHAD was not completely cataloged or located in one facility. That was, we don't want them to be able to find it, so we're going to spread it out to a lot of different places. Furthermore, the Deseret Test Center was closed in the 1970s, and the search for 40-year-old documents and records was kept by different military services in different locations was a challenge to researchers. A fact sheet was developed for each test that was conducted, and when a test cancellation was not documented, a cancellation analysis was developed outlining the logic used to presume that tests had been canceled. And then CBS News came along. The existence of Project SHAD, along with related Project 112, related with Project SHAD, was categorically denied by the military until May of 2000, when a CBS Evening News investigative report produced dramatic revelations about the test. This report caused the Department of Defense and Department of Veterans Affairs to launch an extensive investigation of the experiments and revealed to the affected personnel they exposed to toxins. See, up until that time, if you were exposed to them and you got sick, well, you don't know why you got sick. The doctors don't know why you got sick, and they don't know why you got sick of. Now they have found that that's what that basically says. Now they're going to try to go in and find out some of the military people who were subject to those so they know what they were. It's kind of like using Agent Orange, huh? Revelations concerning Project SHAD were first exposed by independent producer and investigative journalist Eric Longabardi. Longabardi's 6-year investigation into the secret program began in early 1994. He spent 6 years. It ultimately resulted in a series of investigative reports produced by Longabardi, which were broadcast on the CBS Evening News in May of 2000. After the broadcast of these exclusive reports, the Pentagon and Veterans Administration opened their own ongoing investigations into a long classified program. Is that kind of like they're investigating themselves? Okay, how did that come out? In 2002, congressional hearings on Project SHAD. Now the Congress has got involved. We really screwed up. In 2002, congressional hearings on Project SHAD in both the Senate and House further shed media attention on the program. In 2002, a class action federal lawsuit was filed on behalf of the U.S. sailors exposed to the testing. Additional actions, including a multi-year medical study, was conducted by National Academy of Sciences Institute of Medicine to assist the potential medical harm caused to the thousands of unwitting U.S. Navy sailors, civilians, and others who were exposed in this secret testing. The results of those studies were released in May of 2007. Now, let's talk about this just a second. If you were going through the bus station or the airline terminal in New York or in wherever the other place was, well, it was both of them in New York, they don't have your name. So how are they going to do a class action suit? Because they don't know who you are. They might have known who the military people were, but the people who walked through, innocent civilians that walked through, there's no way they got those names for the class action suit, because most of the participants that were involved in Project 112 and SHAD were unaware of any test being done. No effort was made to ensure the informed consent of the military personnel. Okay. The United States Department of Defense conducted testing of agents in other countries that were considered too unethical to perform within the continental United States. Excuse me for laughing, but it's kind of funny that we can test it other places, but we can't test it here. It's not unethical to kill other countries, our friends and allies. Until 1998, the Department of Defense stated officially that Project SHAD did not exist because the Department of Defense refused to acknowledge the program. Surviving test subjects had been unable to obtain disability payments for health issues related to the project. U.S. Representative Mike Thompson said of the program and the Department of Defense efforts to conceal it, they told me, they said, but don't worry about it. We only use simulants. And my first thought was, well, you've lied to these guys for 40 years. You've lied to me for a couple of years. It'd be a real leap of faith for me to believe that now you're telling the truth. The released historical information about Project 112 from the Department of Defense consists of summary fact sheets rather than original documents or maintained federal information. As of 2003, 28 fact sheets have been released, focusing on the Deseret Test Center in Dugway, Utah, which was built entirely for Project 112 SHAD and was closed after the project was finished in 1973. Original records are missing or incomplete. For example, a 91-meter aerosol test tower was sprayed by an F-4E with aerosols on Ursula Island in the Philippines and appears in released original Project SHAD documentation, but without a fact sheet or further explanation or disclosure to the nature of the test that was conducted or even what the test was called. So all we found out was there was a test there in the Philippines, but we don't know what that was testing or what it was called. The U.S. General Accounting Office in September of 1994 found that between 1940 and 1974, the Department of Defense and other national security agencies studied hundreds, perhaps thousands of weapons tests and experiments involving large areas covered of hazardous substance. The report states, and by the way, that's a picture of the entrance of Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah. Dugway Proving Grounds is a military testing facility located approximately 80 miles from Salt Lake City. And I know the wind never blew towards Salt Lake City. For several decades, Dugway has been the site of testing for various chemical and biological agents. From 1951 through 1969, hundreds, perhaps thousands of open-air tests using bacteria and viruses that cause diseases in humans, animals, and plants were conducted at Dugway. It is unknown how many people in the surrounding vicinity were also exposed to potential harmful agents used in the open test at Dugway. Innocent civilians in cities, on subways, and in airports were sprayed with disease-carrying mosquitoes, aerosols, and containing bacteria and viruses, or exposed to a variety of dangerous chemicals, biological and radiological agents, as well as stimulants agents that were later found to be more dangerous than first thought. It's kind of like Agent Orange won't hurt you. That's what they told us. They wouldn't have lied to us. Precise information on the number of tests, experiments, and participants is not available. An exact number of veterans exposed will probably never be known. The study lists 31 biological field tests performed at various military installations. The study did not quantify the number of test participants, nor did it identify them because they never told them they knew who they were. In addition, it was reported in 1993 and 1994 that hundreds of radiological, chemical, and biological tests were conducted in which hundreds of thousands of people were used as test subjects. Also reported was the Army Chemical Corps conducted a classified medical research program for developing incapacitating agents. This program involved testing nerve agent antidotes, psychochemicals, and irritants. In total, Army documents identified 7,120 Army and Air Force personnel who participated in these tests. And what it doesn't say there was unknown to them. Further, GAO concluded that precise information on the scope and the magnitude of tests involving human subjects were not available. An exact number of human subjects might never be known. The 34 Alpha Plan. Now we're going to stop right there on the chemicals and so forth. We're going in a completely different direction now. You can think about the chemical and so forth that government, but we're going a different route. The 34 Alpha Plan, which is also almost as confusing. From an interview with Bill Kendall, a SOG, that Special Operations Group, which we think of as being the Special Forces, from an interview with Bill Kendall, a SOG member in the early days from 1964 to 1965, and then did another tour at Command and Control Center in 1968. SOG went through a lot of changes during this time. The biggest being the change over from the CIA management to being run by the Army. And I'll explain to how that came about in just a minute. During the early years, there was a focus on agent insertion into North Vietnam and less on cross-border reconnaissance into Laos and Cambodia. But there was a problem with that. Bill's service even predated SOG working with the CIA running teams of agents into North Vietnam. Now, wonder what year those started. Okay. The Special Operations Group, as the unit was initially titled, was in fact controlled by the Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities and the staff at the Pentagon. This arrangement was necessary since SOG needed some listing in the MacV table of organization and the fact that MacV's command, General William Westmoreland, had no authority to conduct operations outside territorial South Vietnam. So they had to make sure that it was under the title of a regular military there, even though it wasn't really part of that military stuff. Okay. This command arrangement through Special Assistance for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities also allowed tight control up to the president level of the scope and scale of the organization's operations. These operations, O-Plan 34 Alpha, were conducted in an effort to convince the North Vietnamese Communists to cease its sponsorship of the Communist insurgency in South Vietnam. This was in the beginning when most of the fighting was by the Viet Minh who had moved south when they divided up the two countries. A lot of the communists under the Communist Party of North Vietnam moved south, and they were called the Viet Minh. They were also, the Viet Minh were the group that ran out the French at Dien Bien Phu. Similar operations had originally been under the purview of the CIA, which had carried out the emplacement of agents teams in North Vietnam using airdrops and over-the-beach insertions. Okay. Under pressure from the Secretary of Defense, Robert S. McNamara, the program, along with all other agencies' paramilitary operations, were turned over to the military in the wake of disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion operations in Cuba. And that was because President Kennedy felt that the CIA had withheld information from him that almost guaranteed the Bay of Pigs invasion failure. And it was a real cluster. Because of this action, he wanted to take some of the power away from the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the CIA. So he made the SOG group, which was up until that time run by the CIA. He put it in the military. And if you remember the movie with John Wayne, the Green Berets, that was just about the time along the story that they were taken over by the United States military, which now most of them are stationed around Fort Bragg. The mission of the organization was to execute and intensify programs of harassment, diversion, political pressure, capture of prisoners, physical destruction, acquisition of an intelligence, generations of propaganda, and diversion of resources against the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, which is North Vietnam. In other words, they weren't fighting at any front. They were sneaking into North Vietnam and doing all these things and so forth behind the scenes, kind of. Colonel Clyde Russell, SOG's first commander, had difficulty in creating an organization with which to fulfill his mission, since at the time, United States Special Forces were unprepared either doctrinally or organizationally to carry it out. In other words, it was hard for them they didn't do things like the CIA did, so it was hard for them to get the two of them working together there to one. At this point, the mission of the Special Forces was the conduct of guerrilla operations behind enemy lines in the event of an invasion by conventional forces, and not in the conduct of agent, maritime, or psychological operations. Russell expected to take over a fully functioning organization and assumed that the CIA, which would maintain a representation on SOG's staff and contribute personnel to the organization, would see the military through any teething troubles. Expectations and assumptions were incorrect. The contribution of the South Vietnamese came in the form of SOG's counterpart organization, the Strategic Technical Directorate. But they got little doctrine from the CIA, so forth, and putting this new group together. After a slow and shaky start, the unit got its operations underway. Originally, these consisted of continuation of CIA's agent infiltration. Teams of South Vietnamese volunteers were parachuted into the north, but the majority were captured soon after the insertions. In other words, there was some communists in the Vietnamese group, and they knew when these spies or these special soldiers were going to be going and where they were going to be landing, so they were usually waiting for them. Maritime operations against the coast of North Vietnam picked up after the delivery of Norwegian-built Nasty-class torpedo boats to the unit, but these operations also fell short of expectations. Okay, so I'm going to throw out the telephone number to you right here, 919-518-9773, or Computers 2K Voice on Skype. So you can ask questions or make comments and so forth, because I know there's people out there talking about SOG and chomping at the bit. MacV SOG Command and Control Center, CCC, was formed by MacV SOG, that's Military Assistance Command Vietnam, that's what MacV is, in late 1967, located in Kon Tum and operated in the tri-border junction of Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Now, there's a reason for why it was conducted in the area of Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, because they're in all three places. See, there was a secret war going on in Laos and Cambodia while the Vietnam War was going on, which we'll talk about another day. The primary mission of the Command and Control Central, just like the other Command and Control Centers, were strategic reconnaissance, gathering, and cross-border or over-the-fence operations were invariably codenamed in the interest of secrecy, with missions in Laos being known as Shining Brass and later after 1968 as Prayer Fire. Missions into Cambodia, we didn't go into Cambodia up until later on. Missions into Cambodia also given code names and were initially known as Daniel Boone, and later in the war this was changed to Salem House. Okay? We were always in Cambodia and Laos. We were probably in Cambodia and Laos before we were in Vietnam. The combat elements associated with Command and Control Center were used to reinforce and assist the recon missions. The first MacV SOG recon teams were initially called Spike Teams. Each team usually consisted of 3 United States Special Forces personnel and 9 indigenous personnel, depending on what country they were in. Command and Control Center fielded approximately 30 recon teams that were named after U.S. states. Recon teams that got into difficulty called for assistance from U.S.-led reaction forces known as hatchet forces. These were platoon size and consisted of 5 U.S. Special Forces and about 30 personnel. Hatchet forces could also be used for ambush as well as reinforcing recon teams. So if you go back up here and you look at a 12-man team going out, that's not a whole lot of firepower. So they had to be real careful how they got into firefights and so forth, because they would usually be outnumbered. So if they were in deep doo-doo and needed help, then they could call in the hatchet forces. Okay. 2 or more hatchet forces combined were termed as a havoc or hornet force. Full SOG companies were called SLAM companies. Search, location, annihilation, monitor, or mission of these command and control had 4 A, B, C, and D, and used U.S. paid indigenous personnel recruited and paid for by MacV SOG. Like in Vietnam, it could have been the Montagnards. It could have been some of the Vietnamese troops. In Cambodia, Laos, it could have been different groups. I think it's in Cambodia, it was Hmong and so forth. So, okay, that kind of confused you about that. Everybody wanted to know what SOG always did. We always wondered when I was in Vietnam exactly what SOG, whether we were afraid somebody would tell us, because then they'd have to kill us, so forth. So anyway, now we're going on to talk about another secret mystery here. This is more of a mystery than secret. This man was once called a deserter. He's now honored as a hero. It's United States Marine Corporal Robert Daniel Corvo. He is from this information I'm going to be giving you is from Pennsylvania Crime Stoppers website. So that's what it looked like. On November 18th, 1968, shortly before 11 o'clock a.m., a Pennsylvania state trooper, while on routine patrol along the Pennsylvania Turnpike, spotted a male in semi-seated position against a fence about a mile east of the Downingtown interchange in Chester County. The trooper stopped to check on the man and found that he was deceased. An autopsy determined that he had been stabbed once through the heart. The deceased male carried no wallet or identification. He was white, appeared to be between 20 and 30 years of age, dark brown hair, and hazel eyes. He had 2 tattoos, one being a bird in flight with a heart in the background, and the other being a bulldog wearing a World War I helmet and the letters USMC printed below it. He also had what was believed to be a heel bullet wound to his upper left arm. Now, that would kind of give me the idea the guy was probably a Marine. At that particular period of time, he was probably wounded in Vietnam. But hindsight. An investigation into the man's death and his identity was conducted by the Pennsylvania State Police Criminal Investigation Unit, at which time it was called the Troop J Exton Substation. The incident was reported by newspapers in the surrounding area, including Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Wilmington, Delaware. Correspondence detailing the man's description and Polaroid photos were distributed to surrounding United States Marine Corps and naval installations. So they did send it out to the Marines and so forth and Navy. Initial and subsequent attempts to identify the deceased male through the fingerprint records in national and military databases were unsuccessful. The man was in the military. He had fingerprints. The deceased male became a John Doe and was laid to rest at Longwood Cemetery in an unmarked grave where he remained unidentified for 44 years. On July 29, 2009, in an effort to further the investigation, members of the Pennsylvania State Police Criminal Investigative Assessment Missing Persons Unit with assistance from the Chester County District Attorney's Office and Chester County Coroner's Office exhumed John Doe's body. Bone samples were sent to the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification, where a DNA profile was obtained and entered into a national missing persons database. Additionally, because it was believed that John Doe had served in the United States Marine Corps, a request for assistance was sent to the Naval Criminal Investigation Service, as we know as NCIS. One of Gibbs worked on it. In October 2011, NCIS and the United States Marine Corps Absentee Collection Unit discovered a potential match to John Doe while reviewing records of individuals that were reported absent without leave or AWOL in October of 1968. Now, if I remember correctly, that is not the real nomenclature for the Marines and the Navy. AWOL is for the Army. For the Marines, I forgot exactly what it was. I've had a loss of recovery memory here. But anyway, he won't where he's supposed to be. On December of 2011, surviving family members of the potential match were located and interviewed by the Pennsylvania State Police. A DNA sample was obtained from a family member and sent to the University of North Texas Center for Human Identifications for comparison to John Doe's DNA. Through the combined efforts of the Pennsylvania State Police, Criminal Investigation Assessment Missing Persons Unit, NCIS, USMC, University of Texas Center for Human Identifications, Chester County District Attorney's Office, Chester County Coroner's Office, and family members, John Doe was positively identified by DNA as United States Marine Corps couple Robert Daniel Corvo. Unauthorized that. That's it. Oh, yes, that's what. Okay. I told you it was wrong. I just couldn't remember exactly how it was. That was Amnon keeping me straight, as always. Okay. Corporal Corvo, originally from Lawrence, Massachusetts. You know, I had to get married to a Yankee to learn how to pronounce that. Massachusetts, was 20 years old at the time of his death. He enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps in March of 1965. He served several tours in Vietnam, was injured in the line of duty, and was wounded in action on 3 occasions in Vietnam in 1967. He received treatment for his wounds at the Chelsea Naval Hospital in Chelsea, Massachusetts. In October of 1968, Corporal Corvo was admitted into the Philadelphia Naval Hospital in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where he was receiving psychiatric treatment for PTSD. It has been determined that Corporal Corvo was discovered missing by hospital personnel at approximately 7:50 a.m. on November 18, 1968, which was the same day his deceased body was discovered along the Pennsylvania Turnpike. Now, let me ask y'all out there something. You got a guy that was at the hospital, and he went missing. They find a body not that far away. Well, I guess that's just thinking too much. Anyway, moving right along. October 17, 1968, Marine MP signed Corporal Robert Daniel Corvo into Naval Hospital in Philadelphia. He had been escorted there from his home in Massachusetts after several violent outbursts prompted calls to the police and then Marine Corps authorities. The 3-time wounded Vietnam combat veteran was home on leave when the incidents occurred in the Philadelphia Naval Hospital. He was being treated in the psychiatric unit. He had voided morning muster on November 18, 1968, and was later determined unauthorized leave. Okay, instead of AWOL. I knew when I researched this, the guy didn't know what he was talking about. Corporal Robert Bobby Dan Corvo had finally been found. The 20-year-old Marine from Lawrence, Massachusetts received 2 Purple Hearts after being wounded 3 times in action. He disappeared from Philadelphia Naval Hospital while on leave in 1968. Suffering from symptoms that might be diagnosed today as post-traumatic stress, he was labeled a deserter, which tortured his family. But it remains unclear whether they will ever know what happened. The cold case is among NCIS's toughest tangle of busted leads and dead ends that have gone dormant for decades. Decades have wiped away evidence and leads. 44 years. Names change, people die, and crime scenes on barren farmland are transformed by development projects. The evidence that does exist comes from a time before electronic trails left by cell phones, emails, and text messages. Investigators in the Corvo case can't even track down people who were at the hospital with him. Records are privacy protected, and the building has been demolished after 44 years. Who killed Lance Corporal Robert Daniel Corvo? So if you're out there and you want to confess after 44 years, now's your chance. Go to the Pennsylvania State Police and say, I did it. But if you didn't do it, don't do that. But give that family some closure. If you did it in 44, you're getting a little gray in the hair and so forth. Or if you know somebody who did it and so forth, because they probably talked about it and so forth, go tell the authorities and let that family get some closure, their final closure. Let's talk about another thing. Out there, do y'all believe in UFOs? Mm-hmm. Okay. I think there's something out there, unidentified flying objects. I'm not certain about little green men, but there's something out there. All right. Well, Vietnam is not any different. You had people there who believe in UFOs, and you have people who didn't. You have people who saw things they can't explain, but they don't want to call it a UFO. And UFO is just an unidentified flying object. I mean, it could be an airplane if it's an unidentified flying object, but some of these are strange. So let's talk about a couple of them. There has not been much information about the UFO sightings in and around the Vietnam War. Some are more believable than others. But from my research, I found out there was quite a few. In June of 1968, Australian spotters saw 30 floating lights near the DMZ. Fearing another Tet Offensive-style attack, NATO forces promptly scrambled F-4 fighters and patrol boats to intercept. The lights turned seaward and came under fire from various ships in the area. Unfortunately, a U.S. Navy swift boat got hit by friendly missiles and sank. I don't know who came up with the idea of friendly fire, but ain't nothing too friendly about it. And there's a lot of men who died in Vietnam because of it, killing 5 of the crew. Amid the confusion, the Australian destroyer HMS Hobart sat ready to engage the enemy at 3:30 a.m. The commander called action stations when the radar room detected an airplane coming in fast with no identification. Friend or foe? They never said. The plane opened fire on the HMS Hobart, damaging the ship and killing the crew members. Throughout the confusion, the F-4s tried to make contact with the floating lights, but there were only a few inconclusive engagements. Later that night, the pilots returned to their base. That's an F-4. And you can see the UFOs in the picture there. The next morning, no wreckage or enemy helicopters was found, even though there was a flurry of anti-aircraft fire trying to intercept the lights. Eventually, the incidents were chalked up to atmospheric disturbances or possible helicopter activity. Well, I can tell you, the North Vietnamese had few helicopters, and they usually kept those way away from where they were going to get shot down. So there probably wasn't. There's always that possibility, but it's slim that it would be a North Vietnamese helicopter. Okay. Commander of the U.S. 7th Air Force, General George S. Brown, went on record after the war with his beliefs. A lot of questions. Although the government had grouped all UFO sightings under the heading of enemy helicopter activity, Brown believed that the Hobart incident was a case of UFO interference in military operations. Early in the Vietnam War, Pete Mazzello, a young soldier, had no real interest in UFOs at the time that he arrived in Vietnam. Mazzello experienced sightings that made him believe in UFOs. And you can see something flying through the air there. We don't know if it's a meteorite or a UFO, exactly what it is. UFO. Well, it's after a UFO right there, isn't it? Throughout his tour, Mazzello noted that he saw many meteors that moved in a way that was unlike a normal shooting star. Later during his tour, he even had a direct experience with UFO. In other words, if it's going one direction and it suddenly changes direction, there's not many meteorites that do that. Okay. One day on patrol, his squad got pinned down by enemy soldiers. They stayed low and hid, hoping to find a way out of the mess. As they were trying to figure out a way home, they saw bright objects rise up above the paddy fields and hover in the air. When the objects rose in the air, the objects took fire from the American warships to the south. But surprisingly, the Viet Cong also started shooting at the floating lights. Neither side could seem to touch the objects. Mazzello recalls seeing the shells exploding just short of the lights, even though they were right on target. Whatever the lights were, neither side recognized them as being friendly. The experience had such an effect on Mazzello that he founded an organization called Scientific Bureau for Investigation After the War. Based out of New York City, Mazzello dedicated his life to researching UFOs, experience, and other paranormal events. What is it? What is that? It looks like the typical what we think about as a flying saucer, but it's a UFO. Let's talk about Nha Trang. Nha Trang is right on the ocean, very large military base, good part of it. Air Force, you can see its location there. You can see Ho Chi Minh City, which is actually Saigon, to your left there, Cambodia, South China Sea. In 1966, the U.S. military base in Nha Trang, South Vietnam, was also the site of one of the most interesting UFO encounters of the war. Unlike other UFO encounters, this one had a few thousand soldiers as witness. During a night without fighting, the American GIs got ready to watch an outdoor movie. We built our own outdoor screen. Bulldozers were working on the hills nearby, and two Sky Raiders were warming up the engines for a mission. Those are airplanes. An oil tanker was close by in the harbor, because we're right on the ocean. As the soldiers watched their movie, the sky to the north suddenly lit up. Initially, the soldiers thought it was a flare. And at night, you saw a lot of flares go up, so you didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it. But suddenly, the lights moved towards the base. Flares go up, and then they come down. They don't move. Eyewitness reports that the lights moved erratically, speeding up and slowing down, darting around. It was flying at about 25,000 feet. Suddenly, the lights stopped and dived downward, hovering 30 to 50 feet off the ground. When the lights descended, all the electrical equipment in the base shorted out, including the engine of the Sky Raider and the bulldozers. The light hovered for a bit and then shot straight up, disappearing into the night sky. Eventually, the power came back, but nobody could understand what happened. There was a lot of soldiers at that base. Let's talk about Rambo. I guess most of you out there have seen a Rambo movie, and well, how did Rambo come about? John Rambo, in the movies, was a fictional character that showed strength, determination, and patriotism. But I can give you the names of at least 6 real heroes of the Vietnam War that had the characteristics that the movie character showed. There was some of them out there that did just about anything that Rambo could do, but they did it better out there, and we'll be doing a show later on about some of those guys. But the guy who wrote First Blood, David Moore, introducing his Rambo to the world, as he was writing his book, he had struggled with what to call his main character. I mean, John Smith didn't seem to work, or Harold. It just didn't have the power that he was looking for. He called his main character. So one day he was working, he picked up an apple, taking a bite, and found the apple delicious. He asked his wife what kind of apple it was. She said it was a Rambo. He felt the name Rambo showed a sound of force. He had the first name, and John Rambo was born from an apple. Moore wanted to write a book about a decorated war hero who was struggling to assimilate back in the world in civilian life, which we now call post-traumatic stress. He read of the real-life story of the most decorated soldier in the history of World War II. That soldier was Audie Murphy, who was awarded every medal the United States had, and they were all for valor. You can receive like a Bronze Star, but then you can receive a Bronze Star with a V device for valor. A Silver Star is for valor anyway. He also received 5 other medals from Allied countries. After the war, Audie Murphy played himself in the adaptation of his autograph in the movie To Hell and Back. Now, I just amazed that the man who was suffering from post-traumatic stress went through things he did in that movie. If you are too young and you have not seen that movie, I highly recommend you get the movie. It's based on a true story. He is the actor playing Audie Murphy. Audie Murphy plays Audie Murphy. Audie Murphy made 44 additional movies. I was always a fan of him in his movies, but he also struggled with severe post-traumatic stress. His post-traumatic stress caused him a lot of personal problems with marriages, alcohol, and other challenges. Audie Murphy died in a plane crash in 1971. He'd kind of lost his luster, but he was making some movies and having a comeback when he was killed in the plane crash. The challenge Audie Murphy faced in his assimilation to society is the type of characterization Moore wanted for his John Rambo. Moore decided to change the time period in his novel to post-Vietnam, instead of World War II, with its turmoil and attitudes toward Vietnam veterans. Thus, we now have a fictional, malcontent Vietnam veteran as a loner and doesn't fit into society. You know, a typical stereotype of the Vietnam veteran, but this one is also a hero. But Arthur John Rambo was a real person. Staff Sergeant. Silver Star. He is on the wall at panel West 16, line 126. Date of casualty would have been November 26, 1969. The President of the United States of America, authorized by Act of Congress July 9, 1918, amended by an act of July 25, 1963, takes pride in presenting the Silver Star posthumously to Sergeant Arthur John Rambo, United States Army, for gallantry in action while engaged in military operations involving conflict with an armed hostile force on 26 November 1969, while serving as an artilleryman with the Howitzer Battery, 3rd Squadron, 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment in the Republic of Vietnam. Okay. Now, Forrest Gump was one of the best Vietnam movies I've ever seen. Forrest Gump was based on the 1986 novel by Winston Groom. The story depicts several decades in the life of Forrest Gump, a slow-witted but kind-hearted man from Alabama, who witnessed and unwittingly influences several defining historical events in the 20th century in the United States. The film differs substantially from the novel. Now, if you look up at the picture there, you'll see Tom Hanks or Forrest Gump receiving his Medal of Honor from President Johnson. If you look at the picture directly under him, that is the real guy receiving the Medal of Honor from President Johnson. They just put Tom Hanks's picture on it, and to the right is the real guy. His name is Sammy Davis Jr. Okay. Both the movie and novel center on the character of Forrest Gump. However, the film primarily focuses on the first 11 chapters of the novel, while skipping ahead to the end of the novel with the founding of Bubba Gump Shrimp Company and the meeting with Forrest Gump Jr. In addition to skipping some parts of the novel, the film also adds several aspects to Gump's life that did not occur in the novel, such as his needing leg braces as a child and his run across the United States. Gump's core character and personality are also changed from the novel. Among other things, his film character is less of a savant. In the novel, while playing football at the university, he fails craft and gym, but received the perfect score in advanced physics class and is enrolled by his coach to satisfy his college requirements. The novel also features Gump as an astronaut, a professional wrestler, and a chess player. The real Forrest Gump, that is Sammy L. Davis, just like the Sammy Davis Jr. Entertainer. Davis enlisted in the Army directly out of high school in 1965, volunteered for the artillery because his father had been an artilleryman in World War II, and was assigned to the 4th Artillery. Soon after completing training, he asked to be sent to Vietnam. Early on November 18, 1967, his unit of 11 guns and 42 men was helicoptered into an area west of My Lai to set up a forward fire support base, Firebase Cudgel, for American infantrymen operating in the area. Now, it's amazing how they took that picture and put Tom Hanks's picture in there. It just was so seamless. Anyway, shortly after midnight the next morning, Private First Class Davis's Battery C came under heavy mortar attack. Almost simultaneously, an estimated 1,500 Viet Cong soldiers launched an intense ground assault. Failing to overrun the Americans, go back one sheet just a minute. Let's see. Well, we got the one screen. Let's see. His unit of 42 men. Okay, that's what I want to see. So 42 men are now under attack by 1,500 Viet Cong. And they were there with the guns and couldn't get in place. And they kept them being overrun, only because the river separated the two forces. Davis' squad was operating a 105 millimeter howitzer that fired 18,000 beehive darts in each shell. And there's your 105, and inside that shell there was a lot of needles, like darts, and it was just, I mean, they were awesome, unless you were getting hit with them. When he saw how close the enemy had come, Davis took over a machine gun and provided covering fire for his gun crew. But an enemy recoilless rifle round scored a direct hit on the howitzer, knocking the crew from the weapon and blowing Davis sideways into a foxhole. Okay. Convinced that the heavily outnumbered Americans couldn't survive the attack, he decided to fire off at least one round from the damaged artillery piece before being overrun. He struggled to his feet, rammed a shell into the gun, and fired point blank at the Viet Cong, who were advancing 5 deep directly in front of the weapon. The beehive round cut them down. An enemy mortar round exploded nearby, knocking Davis to the ground. But he got up and kept firing the howitzer. When there were no more rounds left, he fired a white phosphorus shell, and then the last round he had a propaganda shell filled with leaflets. So the Viet Cong was supposed to stop and go Chihoy program. That's bad when you get down to the point you're having to fire leaflets at them. Okay. At this point, he heard yelling from the other side of the river and realized that GIs had been cut off there. Despite the fact that he didn't know how to swim, he got in the water and paddled across on an air mattress from the American camp. Other GIs followed him. He couldn't swim. Scrambling up the bank, he found 3 wounded soldiers, one of them suffering from a head wound that looked fatal. He gave them all morphine and provided covering fire as other GIs helped the most gravely wounded soldier cross the river and then pulled the other 2 through the water on the air mattress to the fire base. He eventually made his way to an American howitzer crew and resumed the fight. Sometime before dawn, he was seriously wounded in the back and buttocks by friendly fire. I tell you, that friendly fire. On November 19th, 1968, exactly 1 year and 1 day after a night-long firefight at Kali, Davis received the Medal of Honor from President Lyndon Johnson. Years later, footage of LBJ putting the medal on Davis's neck appeared in the movie Forrest Gump with Tom Hanks head substituted for Davis's. And Gump's fictional Medal of Honor citation was loosely based on Davis's real one. Now there is Samuel Davis standing in front of a poster in a speech he was giving. I believe that was in New Orleans, and it says the real Forrest Gump, and of course he signed it, but that's who the events that the Medal of Honor was given to Forrest Gump on. That was the real Forrest Gump that he goes by. So Vietnam Archive Pentagon Study traces 3 decades of growing U.S. involvement. 3 decades, that's 30 years. So the Pentagon Papers kind of gives you the idea that maybe we were in Vietnam more than the 10 years that they said we were, if we go to Pentagon Papers. So that's another secret and mystery for another time. Secrets are things just not mentioned, mysteries or decisions made for reasons not understood. Most people in the larger bases do not keep their weapons with them. They were locked up in either an armory or in a rack in their living quarters. We call them hooches. Ammunition was also kept separately. These weapons more likely than never cleaned or even during the dry season when everything was covered with dirt. These soldiers probably had not fired a weapon since basic training. Something happened, like Tet. Who has the key to the weapon rack? How can they get their weapons out of the Army? How can they get their weapons out of the rifle rack? Because who has the key? You got to remember, you served a year and you came home. What the guy who had the key came home? Where's the ammunition? And if you get the ammunition, how many clips they're going to give you? See, that is also a secret and mystery of the Vietnam War. But you're in a war zone, so why would they want to give you rifles with ammunition and so forth? Well, you got to remember the base camps was sometimes, some of the base camps were almost like being at home, and they didn't want you to get drunk and shoot yourself or somebody else. So that's kind of why they didn't have the weapons. If you remember back when the bombing of the Beirut barracks in the Marine Corps, where a bunch of Marines were killed, those guards standing at the gate there did not have, they had weapons, but didn't have ammunition. So thank you for taking part in Lessons of Vietnam online TV history program. We hope you were entertained and learned something about the Vietnam War in its era. I want to tell you, don't be dinky dow. Tune in to our next show, 11th September, which is now recognized as Patriots Day. In the meantime, I want to tell you a few things that are going on that you might be interested in if you live in the Raleigh-Durham Research Triangle area of North Carolina. September 2nd is Labor Day. Please be safe and enjoy the day. September 7th, the monthly POW MIA ceremony at the Raleigh, North Carolina State Capitol starts at 12 o'clock noon. If you've never been, it's worth the trip. September 8th is Grandparents' Day. If you still have yours, please reach out to them. Because without them, you wouldn't be there. And if Grandpa served in the Vietnam War or so forth, he might even tell you some of his secrets about the Vietnam War. September 12th, 13th, and 14th is that special day we talked about last show about benefits, getting your claims abdicated, and getting everything you need to taken care of through the VA. They're expecting about 1,500 people, so get there early. Plan on being in lines, but they hope to get to everybody that were coming there. But that's in Cary, North Carolina, at the Civic Center there. Again, thank you for tuning in. Looking forward to seeing you November 11th for our next show. Thank you. Good night.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.